The day of my father's funeral dawned with a heavy sky, the clouds hanging low like a shroud over the somber scene that awaited us. As we gathered at the cemetery, the air was thick with grief, mingling with the scent of freshly turned earth and the distant rumble of thunder. I stood by my mother's side, offering what little comfort I could as we watched the casket being lowered into the ground. The rain fell in a steady rhythm, drumming against umbrellas and soaking the mourners to the bone. Amidst the sea of black-clad figures, I caught sight of Nora, my sister, her eyes red-rimmed with tears as she clung to her husband, Michael. Their presence was a sharp reminder of the fractured relationships that lingered beneath the surface of our family. As the eulogies began, memories of my father flooded my mind, his booming laugh, his gentle smile, the way he always seemed to know just what to say. It was a bittersweet symphony of remembrance, each word a tribute to the man we had loved and lost. But amidst the sorrow, a discordant note was struck when Michael leaned in close, his voice low and insistent. "You know, John," he murmured, "it's only right that all the inheritance goes to you and your mother. After all, you were his favorite son." His words hit me like a blow to the chest, sparking a surge of anger and disbelief. How could he suggest such a thing at a time like this, when we were mourning the loss of our father? I glanced at Nora, her expression unreadable, as if she were bracing herself for the storm that was about to break. "We can discuss this later, Michael," I replied through clenched teeth, struggling to maintain my composure amidst the rising tide of emotion. But even as I spoke, I knew that the seeds of discord had been sown, casting a shadow over our already fractured family dynamics. As the rain continued to fall, washing away the tears of grief and regret, I couldn't help but wonder what lay ahead for us in the wake of my father's passing. Little did I know that his funeral would be only the beginning of a journey fraught with betrayal, upheaval, and unexpected twists of fate. In the days that followed my father's funeral, our family found itself ensnared in a tangled web of emotions and secrets, each thread pulling us further into the abyss of our fractured relationships. The atmosphere in our family home was heavy with tension, the air thick with unspoken words and lingering resentment. Nora's presence seemed to cast a shadow over us all, her past indiscretions looming large in the wake of my father's passing. As we gathered to sift through the remnants of my father's life, the truth began to emerge like cracks in a fragile facade. Nora's history of financial irresponsibility was no secret, her penchant for reckless spending and unpaid debts a constant source of frustration for our family. But now, with the promise of a substantial inheritance hanging in the balance, her dependence on our father's wealth seemed more glaring than ever. Each unpaid bill, each extravagant purchase served as a damning indictment of her character, a testament to her inability to stand on her own 2 feet. And yet, despite the evidence before us, Nora remained defiant, her gaze steady and unwavering as she faced the scrutiny of our family's judgment. "It's not fair," she protested, her voice tinged with bitterness. "I've always been Daddy's little girl. Why should I be punished for his mistakes?" But my mother and I stood firm, unwilling to yield to her demands. We had seen firsthand the havoc Nora's recklessness had wrought, and we were determined not to let her drag us down with her. "Your entitlement knows no bounds, Nora," I countered, my words laced with frustration. "You've spent a lifetime living off of Daddy's generosity. It's time you learn to stand on your own 2 feet." As the truth of my father's will began to emerge, Nora's facade of entitlement crumbled, giving way to a storm of anger and disbelief. She and Michael lashed out, their voices rising in protest as they demanded their rightful share of the inheritance. But my mother and I stood united, refusing to be swayed by their empty words and hollow promises. For beneath the surface of their protests lay a deeper truth, one that threatened to tear our family apart at the seams. And as we stood on the precipice of uncertainty, I couldn't help but wonder what lay ahead for us in the wake of my father's passing. Little did I know that the road ahead would be fraught with betrayal, upheaval, and unexpected twists of fate. As tensions simmered beneath the surface of our fractured family, the inevitable confrontation loomed on the horizon like a gathering storm, each passing moment bringing us closer to the breaking point. It began with a heated exchange, the air thick with unspoken accusations and bitter recriminations. Nora and Michael stood before us, their faces twisted with anger and disbelief as they demanded their rightful share of the inheritance. "You can't deny us what's rightfully ours," Michael insisted, his voice ringing out like a challenge in the dimly lit room. But my mother and I stood firm, our resolve unwavering in the face of their misplaced entitlement. We had seen firsthand the havoc Nora's reckless spending had wrought, and we were determined not to let her drag us down with her. As accusations flew and tempers flared, lines were drawn in the sand, dividing us into opposing factions. My loyalty to my mother and the truth of my father's will place me at odds with Nora and Michael, driving a wedge between us that seemed impossible to bridge. And as we stood on the precipice of uncertainty, I couldn't help but wonder what lay ahead for us in the wake of my father's passing. Little did I know that the road ahead would be fraught with betrayal, upheaval, and unexpected twists of fate. As the dust settled from our explosive confrontation, the repercussions of Nora's actions began to reverberate through our family like shockwaves, leaving behind a trail of legal turmoil and shattered illusions. It began with a knock at the door, the sound echoing through the quiet stillness of our home like a harbinger of doom. A stern-faced lawyer stood on the threshold, his presence a stark reminder of the consequences that awaited us in the wake of my father's passing. "We need to talk," he announced, his voice grave with the weight of the truth. "There are legal matters that must be addressed." As we gathered around the table, the truth began to emerge like cracks in a fragile facade, exposing the tangled web of deceit and betrayal that lay at the heart of our family's unraveling. Nora found herself facing accusations of mishandling our mother's finances, her once charmed life now crumbling around her as the full extent of her greed came to light. "It's not fair," she protested, her voice tinged with desperation as she faced the consequences of her actions. "I was just trying to make ends meet." But the evidence spoke for itself, a damning indictment of her reckless spending and disregard for the consequences of her actions. And as the truth of her deceit began to unravel, Nora found herself facing a reckoning unlike any she had ever known. As the legal battle raged on, the once grand facade of wealth and privilege crumbled, leaving behind a tangled web of deceit and betrayal. No longer could Nora hide behind her illusions of entitlement, forced to confront the consequences of her actions head-on. And as the truth came to light, our family found itself at a crossroads, grappling with the fallout of Nora's betrayal and the shattered illusions that had once defined us. Little did we know that the road ahead would be fraught with challenges as we struggled to rebuild what had been lost in the wake of my father's passing. In the wake of the legal repercussions that followed Nora's actions, our family found itself teetering on the brink of collapse, the once solid foundation of our relationships crumbling beneath the weight of betrayal and mistrust. As tensions reached a boiling point, Nora and Michael launched a vile campaign fueled by their desperation to secure a share of the inheritance they believed was rightfully theirs. Their actions were marked by deceit and manipulation, as they sought to undermine my mother and me at every turn. "We'll do whatever it takes to get our hands on that money," Nora declared, her voice dripping with malice as she plotted their next move. Their first act of betrayal came in the form of slanderous accusations aimed at tarnishing my mother's reputation. They spread malicious rumors and falsehoods, hoping to undermine her credibility and weaken her resolve. "You can't trust anything she says," Michael sneered, his words a poisonous dagger aimed at my mother's heart. "She's just trying to keep the money for herself." But my mother remained steadfast in the face of their attacks, refusing to be swayed by their lies and deception. Together, we stood united against their onslaught, determined to protect what remained of my father's legacy. Undeterred, Nora and Michael stooped to even greater depths, resorting to outright sabotage in their quest for the inheritance. They forged documents and falsified evidence, hoping to cast doubt on the validity of my father's will and claim a share of the fortune for themselves. "We'll stop at nothing to get what's rightfully ours," Nora declared, her eyes gleaming with a sinister light as she reveled in their twisted plot. But their vile acts only served to strengthen our resolve, as my mother and I fought back with every ounce of strength we possessed. We refused to be intimidated by their threats and manipulation, standing firm in our determination to uphold my father's wishes and protect his legacy. As the battle raged on, the divide between us widened, leaving little room for reconciliation. Nora and Michael's greed and entitlement had driven a wedge between us that seemed impossible to bridge. And as we stood on the precipice of uncertainty, I couldn't help but wonder what lay ahead for us in the wake of my father's passing. Little did I know that the road ahead would be fraught with challenges, as we struggled to rebuild what had been lost in the wake of Nora and Michael's vile acts of betrayal. In the wake of the family's division, the harsh reality of the consequences began to dawn upon us like a dark cloud hanging over our heads. Each member of the family found themselves grappling with the aftermath of Nora's actions, forced to confront the fallout of her betrayal. My mother and I stood resolute, determined to weather the storm that had been unleashed upon us. But as the days turned into weeks, the weight of the truth began to take its toll, casting a shadow of uncertainty over our once stable lives. "We can't go on like this," my mother remarked one evening, her voice heavy with exhaustion as she gazed out the window at the darkening sky. "Something has to change." I nodded in silent agreement, feeling the weight of her words pressing down upon me like a burden too heavy to bear. We had weathered many storms together as a family, but this was unlike anything we had ever faced before. As the turmoil of legal battles unfolded, I found myself standing at a crossroads, grappling with the daunting task of appealing to the conscience of Nora and Michael. With the weight of my father's legacy heavy on my shoulders, I knew that the truth of his final wishes must prevail. "It's time to face the reality of the situation," I implored, my voice tinged with urgency as I addressed Nora and Michael. "The will is clear, and it's what our father intended. We must honor his memory by abiding by his wishes." But Nora and Michael remained unmoved, their greed and entitlement clouding their judgment as they clung stubbornly to their misguided beliefs. They refused to acknowledge the truth of the matter, blinded by their own desires for financial gain. "You can't deny the truth," I pressed on, my words a desperate plea for reason in the face of their obstinance. "The last will and testament of our father is legally binding, and we must respect it." But my appeals fell on deaf ears, their hearts hardened by greed and resentment. It seemed that no amount of reasoning could penetrate the walls they had built around themselves, leaving me feeling helpless in the face of their defiance. As the battle raged on, I found myself clinging to the hope that justice would prevail in the end. The truth of my father's final wishes was a beacon of light amidst the darkness of deceit and betrayal, guiding me forward as I fought to uphold his legacy. Meanwhile, Nora and Michael found themselves grappling with their own demons, forced to confront the consequences of their actions head-on. The once charmed life they had known was now a distant memory, replaced by the harsh reality of their own greed and entitlement. "It's not fair," Nora lamented, her voice tinged with bitterness as she faced the harsh truth of her own actions. "I never meant for any of this to happen." But her words fell on deaf ears, the damage already done and irreparable. In the aftermath of the turmoil that had torn our family apart, a glimmer of hope emerged amidst the chaos. With the passage of time, wounds began to heal, and the process of rebuilding our shattered lives began. As the dust settled, my mother and I found ourselves standing on the precipice of a new beginning, determined to forge a path forward despite the obstacles that lay in our way. Together, we faced the daunting task of rebuilding what had been lost in the wake of Nora and Michael's betrayal. But while we focused on rebuilding, the wheels of justice continued to turn, and Nora and Michael soon found themselves facing the consequences of their vile acts. The justice system wasted no time in imposing sanctions on them for their deceit and manipulation. "It's time to pay for your crimes," the judge declared, his voice stern as he handed down the sentence. Nora and Michael's faces fell as they realized the severity of their punishment. For their falsification of documents and attempts to manipulate the legal system, they were each sentenced to years of imprisonment, their freedom stripped away as they were forced to face the consequences of their actions. "It's not fair," Nora protested, her voice tinged with bitterness as she faced the harsh reality of her situation. "We were just trying to secure our future." But the judge remained unmoved, his verdict final as he handed down the sentence. For Nora and Michael, there would be no escaping the consequences of their vile acts. The justice system had spoken and justice had been served. Now it was time for our family to pick up the pieces and move forward, leaving behind the pain and betrayal of the past. And as we stood on the threshold of a new beginning, I felt a renewed sense of hope stirring within me. The road ahead would be long and difficult, but with my family by my side, I knew that we could overcome whatever challenges lay in our path. For Nora and Michael, the road ahead would be long and arduous, filled with obstacles and challenges that would test their resolve to the breaking point.